What was the wildest thing to happen to you at your normal, regular job? Whew, mine would most definitely be what happened today at work. I work at Subway and it was pretty much dead at about 8 a.m. There was an older man who came in, about 6'4", 250 pounds, and he looked about 40 or so. He seemed very shady when I first said hi to him. He walked up to the counter and I asked, "What can I get you today, sir?" And he replied with, "I want a bag of money," in the most serious tone. Now, I've had people come in and joke by saying they want $1 million, and normally we just laugh about it. So I chuckled a little, but his facial expression didn't change. So I asked again, "What can I get you, sir?" And then he asked for the money again with that stern look. At this point, I'm getting extremely nervous because he seemed very serious. 30 seconds of silence went by that seemed like it took 5 minutes. He asked again for a bag of money and I said, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that, sir. Would you like something to eat?" He just stared at me a little longer, never changing his facial expressions. Finally, he decided he wanted a sandwich, but never lost the stern expression on his face. I still don't know whether he was actually being serious about wanting to rob me or if it was all a joke that he never let me know about. It scared the wee-wee out of me nonetheless. In short, a man tried to rob me and I made him a sandwich. I was working in a mall at a burger joint when I looked up and saw a guy coming out of the men's room holding a bloody butcher's knife. The man calmly walked through the food court and out of the mall exit as my manager and I both looked at each other, not believing what we saw. I swear 1 minute later, as we're trying to call security, 15 cops ran by with guns drawn. Turns out the guy had stabbed someone to death in the bathroom. The cops were there so fast because the same guy had violently attacked someone else the day before and escaped. He was recognized by a witness prior to going into the bathroom. In short, I saw the aftermath of a homicide while flipping burgers in a mall. I used to work in a dementia ward. I've been bitten, peed on, had things thrown at me, and attacked by a guy who was hallucinating. But the scariest thing was when one of the electric fireplaces caught fire and 2 of the men in the ward just locked their doors. The time between calling 911 and the firemen getting those 2 out was terrifying. We can only hope that this incident maybe encouraged the ward to perhaps update their doors to ones that couldn't trap the occupants into their own private furnaces during an event like this. But then again, these facilities tend to be underfunded, so who can say? I'm on disability right now due to my scariest work experience. I was a roofer by trade and I'd been working 7 days a week, 10 to 12-hour days, for 3 months. Working on a Sunday, I was finishing the last bit of work for a job at the peak of a roof when some kids came by. They asked if they could go inside the home to talk to the homeowner, and I said no very politely. They then pleaded to at least take pictures of the heritage home I was working on for their school project. Feeling sorry for them, I said, "Okay, fine, but no pictures of the construction, just be quick and careful." Right afterwards, they walked right below where I was working to take a picture. This is where all heck broke loose. Just then, my nail gun slipped and started sliding from the peak of the roof towards the kids. It was gaining speed quick and I was shouting for them to run, move, get the frick out of the way, etc. They didn't. They probably didn't even know what was about to drop on them, so I chased it. I fed myself tons of slack on my lifeline, chasing this thing just to grab it as it was about to fall off. I was able to toss the gun in a completely different direction, but with all the momentum I had, there was no stopping me from going over the edge. And so much slack on my lifeline, so there was nothing to keep me from hitting the ground. I fell 15 feet onto a staircase, shattering my left heel when I landed. The kids moved when they saw me in the air, that much I remember afterwards. This was the scariest thing that's happened to me. Many close calls and all sorts of jobs I've had, but in this particular situation, knowing this is going to hurt like heck is almost indescribable. Surgery went well and 4 months into recovery now. The internet helps with passing the time. I used to work as a production assistant on Dexter. On one fateful afternoon, we were shooting the fight sequence in the garage from episode 3 of season 4, the one where Dexter confronts the vandalizing neighbor. We had a large blackout tent rigged over this person's house to allow us to shoot a day for night, and I was stationed just outside. It was sunny and hot as heck that afternoon, so after a few takes of shouting and fighting, a request came over the radio that Michael C. Hall and J.C. Mackenzie needed some water. I ran to the craft service truck, grabbed as many water bottles as I could, and booked it back to the house. As I stepped inside the tent from the bright sunlight, my vision went black. There was a lone practical light in the garage, meant to mimic Dexter's flashlight, which hardly provided sufficient illumination for my constricted pupils. I stumbled into the garage, arms full of water, doing my best to locate our actors. Despite the various crew members in the garage moving about, I was able to find JC rather quickly. He was right under the light talking to the director. So far, so good. I handed him a bottle and turned to find Michael. I spun around a couple of times, scanning the room, but no signs of MC Hall. Even as my eyes adjusted and shadows became clear, I couldn't find him. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. As I turned around at that perfect moment, the dark passenger emerged. A figure clad in black, wearing a tattered ski mask, rose from the depths of whatever hell he came from and approached me. My spine froze. All the water bottles tumbled to the ground. For a brief moment, I felt the greatest fear I'd ever known. And then I realized it was Michael coming to grab a water. Man, did I look like a fool. He was very nice and apologetic about the whole thing and insisted he wasn't trying to scare me, but merely attempting to stay in character. We shared a good laugh, but seriously, he was wearing a ski mask and he's Dexter. Any man would crack. In short, Dexter Morgan scared me crapless in real life. I used to work with burrowing owls. We'd check nests with a long, flexible camera and a visor over our eyes. Well, one day I headed into this field, knelt down, put the visor on, check the nest. It took about 15 minutes. Then I stretch up and take the visor off. About 50 cows are in a circle 360 degrees around me, staring at me with their cold, dead eyes. I have no idea how I didn't feel them walking over. They started to get nervous and excited as I packed up my stuff, and parted so I could see one very angry bull at the back of the herd. I did my very best calm speed walk out of there. In short, I hate cows with a fiery passion. I worked at an electronic buyback store. One day a customer bought by a new 20-inch LCD monitor in the box. I made an offer and he was more than willing to sell me his product. We normally check all items to make sure they work before we pay out for them, so I decided I'd open the box and take a look inside. As soon as I open the box, over 100 cockroaches come crawling out of it and all over my counter. It took me a good couple of seconds to realize what exactly was coming out of the box, but it was both scary and gross. In short, someone opened a box full of cockroaches at my store. The monitor was in the box, and the customer seemed really shocked and embarrassed about the whole thing. Two people who had come in with just kind of walked away from him as soon as it happened. Can you imagine the conversation between the guy's friends? "Damn it, Jerry, this is why we never take him anywhere. For Pete's sake, Jerry, can we hang out at least once without you opening a box full of invertebrates?" Seriously though, this sounds like it might have closed down the store for a while. Next is a story that stretches our prompt of normal jobs to its limit. This was a volunteer job I had a while back. The giant Pacific octopus had refused food for a few days, so I was told to bring up a variety of stuff and see if I could get him to eat. I went up to his tank, which was in an isolated area, and grabbed some food and waved it around in front of his cave. He immediately shot out, grabbed the thing I was using to feed him, a plastic grabber that you could use to pick up trash, and then wound a couple of arms around my arm. He then latched onto a rock in his tank and yanked me so hard that I was doubled over the tank wall and unable to move. I'd played with octopuses before, and while they often held onto me with a tentacle, they weren't hard to remove, but I could not get this guy to release me. I struggled and managed to get one arm off, but he quickly twisted another around my arm. He was slowly pulling my hand closer to his mouth, which was really freaking me out. I kept shoving food at him. Fortunately, I'd bought a lot, and curling my hand around away from him as much as I could, but I was terrified that my hand was going to get chomped on with his beak. It wouldn't have killed me, but they are venomous, and octopus bites can be pretty nasty, even from small ones. His beak was pretty big. Eventually, he relaxed enough to where I could lift him out of the water a bit. He still had a couple of arms wrapped around my arm, and he didn't much care for that, so he let go and went back into his cave. It left me with about 55 bruises on my arm from the suckers on his tentacles. In short, octopus grabbed me. I was worried he'd bite me. I spin a sign on the side of the road advertising ice cream for a local mum-and-pop store. An undercover cop pulled over a substance dealer right next to me, had him get out of the car, frisked him, and then confiscated a weapon he didn't have a license for. I awkwardly stood there advertising orange swirl ice cream. Did you take advantage? Say, you guys look like you could use some delicious ice cream right now. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work in vet med. One day we had a guy come in with his dog who insisted that his dog's problem, I think it was a minor laceration, was a much more critical thing than those belonging to the 5 or 6 animals already waiting to see a vet, and he demanded that he be allowed to budge the queue. When his initial tactics failed, he began shouting at the receptionist. One of the vet techs went up to try and calm him down, and the guy lost it. He started screaming that making him wait in line was illegal because it meant we were denying the animal his medical assistance, and that before calling the cops on us, he'd be back for personal vengeance. He assured us that he'd bring a piece and any other weapons he could lay his hands on. A lot of people were shaken up, so we called the cops, and they promised to keep an eye on the place for the next few days. We hoped that would be the end of it, but we were wrong. He was back the next day in a karate gi, exactly like the ones that little kids wear to competitions, brown belt and all. He stood in the doorway screaming obscenities while going through every cliché karate pose imaginable. The cops were there within 2 minutes, and that was the last we saw of Karate Man. The weapon threat was terrifying, the outfit, not so much. In short, man came in demanding to budge the line, threatened to come back in with a loaded weapon. Instead, came back in a karate outfit and was promptly arrested. When I worked as a waiter, I always remember a chunky steak knife slipping off a plate I was carrying and watching it fall, tip first, landing at the bottom of the stairs a couple of floors below. A split second after someone walked right in front of it. At a shooting range, I hate new shooters. They get so excited about shooting anywhere in the same zip code of the target that they whip around and say, "Did you see that?" and end up waving their piece at you. It's scary. I used to manage a pizza place, and one Friday around 11:30 a.m., a guy came in looking no different than any other of the smack or crystal heads in the neighborhood. We asked how his day was, and he said, fine, and then when he asked what he'd like to order, he said, "Give me the frickin' money." The cashier said, "What?" And he repeated, "Give me the fricking money." He put his hand inside his jacket and pointed something from the inside. Hindsight tells me it was probably just his hand and not a real piece, but it's not the kind of thing you want to take chances with. The cashier slowly moved to open the drawer and set it on the counter, and the guy grabbed what he could and ran out the door. He only ended up taking about $100, basically what the register had started at, since we'd only been open for 30 minutes. It was just a helpless feeling, though, being in charge and having a cashier potentially in danger like that. I worked at a 5-star rated haunted house for a good 4 years. It was seasonal. My job was to be an evil clown, and my role was to spontaneously appear to the groups that were walking through. Many scary things have happened to me. I've been punched, thrown to the floor, scratched, and have had people try to rip off my mask. I've seen people wet themselves and blow chunks all over the place. However, my all-time most scariest experience was when someone actually started dying in front of me. A woman walked through, passed out in front of me in the walkway, and after I tried helping her up, she began shaking and was trying to say something that I couldn't make out. The fire alarm is in the hall, so it was my first reaction to pull it. My manager ran right up to me and took over. Her eyes were already rolled to the back of her head by the time the ambulance got there, and they were able to save her. The next day, we were told she'd had an allergic reaction walking through the body bag room, which is a room full of elastic, and that's what she was allergic to. The body bag room soon turned into the asylum. Okay, if you're a puncher, stay the frick out of haunted houses. At best, you'll just hurt yourself, and at worst, you'll hurt someone else. In the middle, you'll break some expensive equipment. Yeah, you know what? This is true. The narrator has been guilty of victim-blaming the haunted house workers who get socked in these places. Really, why would you go into one of those things if this is the way you react? Do you want to get sued? I was working for a biotech company and an unknown substance spilled on me. I was freaking out for quite a while. It either gives you cancer or turns you into a superhero. Are you feeling lucky? I was thinking I didn't have any scary work experiences as a kid, but you've just reminded me of mine. I was working in a lab and we all had our powdered chemicals in a series of 7-foot-tall cabinets that slid out from the wall. Inside each one was 5 or 6 shelves with wire walls, so there were gaps. These held all the chemicals in place. One day I was going to put away one of the chemicals I'd been using and pulled out the unit, and this tiny vial of some chemical falls from the top shelf and smashes all over the place. At this point I'm thinking, frick, this thing must be poisonous if it comes in such a small container. So I tell everyone to clear out of the lab and I go to grab the head scientist. He just calmly tells me to go get my respirator and he'll come with me to check out what the chemical was. So we sweep it up into a bag and look at the chemical name, which was ridiculously long. Go to look it up in the MSDs and it turns out that it's the only chemical other than water that I've ever seen with all zeros for the health, flammability, reactivity diamond. I was working construction in the world's biggest oil refinery when there was an explosion maybe 50 yards from me and a big old fiery mushroom cloud shot into the air. We ducked behind some big concrete pipes, since you never expect only one explosion in a refinery, but nothing else happened. I don't consider it my scariest work experience by any means, but this is the one that seems to fit the question the best.
Wait, you mean this isn't your scariest? You have more? Do tell.
I've got so many I've written books about them, but specifically in that oil refinery we oftentimes work up high on the steel frame structures, supporting pipes and whatnot. Our team had a cherry picker on it, which is basically a mobile crane for picking up heavy stuff. We mostly placed stuff like valves and 30-foot-long pipes, maybe a foot or two in diameter, and welded them together. Once we had threaded a pipe via the cherry picker through a complex piping network a couple of stories down from where the tip of the crane boom was situated. The crane held the pipe while we maneuvered it. We were all under that heavy pipe at various times. We finally got it installed, and a bit later were walking to the next job on a refinery road with the cherry picker following us. Its boom was compressed as short as it could go and sticking out straight horizontally atop the mobile platform, with its end hook dangling maybe 10 feet behind the crew as we walked. We heard a thud and turned around to see the hook had fallen off the crane's tip, while it was carrying no load at all. If that had happened just a few minutes earlier while it held the pipe, me or others on the crew would surely have been killed, or at least parts of us crushed and permanently crippled or in need of amputation. To me, something like that was scarier than the fiery mushroom cloud. In that same place, invisible clouds of poison gas were a constant risk. There were little stations sprinkled about the place with sensors, sirens, and revolving lights, with signs saying that if the lights and sirens turned on, to run for your lives away from the station. That happened at least once, maybe more times. It's been over 30 years since then, so I'm hazy on the details. Invisible clouds of death are pretty scary and, to me, scarier than that explosion. I was at a client site supervising the installation of some new major 4000 amp 480 volt switchgear. There was a manufacturer rep there to help troubleshoot any problems we had during energizing the gear for the first time. So everything went smoothly at first, opened all the feeder breakers and then closed the main incoming 4000 amp breaker. So far, so good. As we slowly close the smaller feeder breakers one by one, we get to one that trips as soon as we try to close it. It was probably wired wrong. So the rep opens the main breaker to kill the power to gear. He opens the malfunctioning breaker and sticks his hand in there to check the wiring. The guy fricking yelps, jumps back, and his hard hat comes flying off his head. For a half second, I thought I just watched someone die. Turns out the idiot forgot to discharge the control wiring, so he only got a minor shock from a small charged capacitor. As the construction manager, I had to write up the incident and had a very serious conference call with his employer. I think he might have been fired. I worked in a call center for a large US telecommunications company in sales for 5 years. A woman called in one day, depressed and needing to talk to someone. Her husband had just died, she'd lost her only child a year prior, and she said she didn't want to be alive anymore. This lady had it planned out in great detail, which is why I was even more concerned. I highly suggested 911 because they're trained to handle this sort of thing. At the end of the day, she just needed someone to talk to. I ended up talking her out of self-deleting over the phone and giving her a few other resources I knew of. The Prevention Lifeline, NIMI, among a few others. You'd think working for a phone company in sales could get you some odd characters that call in and it makes for an entertaining story, but this particular incident certainly threw me for a loop. Regardless, at the end of the day, I'm glad this woman didn't take her own life. I work at a skate park. A few months ago, we had a guy try to slash, just ride up and nick the coping with his trucks, on the 7-foot quarter pipe that we call the tombstone. His trucks, the metal things that hold wheels to the skateboard deck, caught up, so he kicked out and wound up landing on the end of his board and shooting out. He smacked his head on the quarter pipe hard enough to break the helmet, and laid on the ground unconscious for a few seconds before going into a seizure. Had to call the ambulance and try to help him out. It took the ambulance 15 minutes to finally arrive. My boss went to visit him at the hospital, and the doctor said if he hadn't been wearing his helmet, he'd be dead. So kids, that is why I'm the jerk about the helmet rule. In short, wear your damn helmet. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.